CK 909. I hear you're doing a class tonight.
WSCK 909, this is WSBU 248. I read you loud and clear. Yep, we're running the class on two-way radio intros.
Oh, these are GMRS radios. You don't need to, you just buy a license for this. You don't have to study anything. So have a good time. I'll be listening.
Thank you, WSCK 909. This is WSBU 248. I'll be standing by. Great. I've started the recording online, and we will get going. So my name is Jacob Aho. I am the town emergency management coordinator on the emergency management committee, and my GMRS call sign is WSBU 248, and my amateur call sign is KC1UJA. And I appreciate you all coming out here to learn a bit more about two-way radios. So this class will cover a lot of basics, but also I think some helpful tips, as well as some information about what we are doing here in town for our emergency communications network that we're building to be able to relay emergency communications that are from the community upward. So what is a two-way radio? It's a device that can both send and receive voice messages using radio waves. So there's no cell phone or no internet required. And so that's really nice because it's a self-sufficient way of communicating. They may also be called walkie-talkies, handheld radios, handy-talkies, or HTs is an older name for them, or transceivers because they're transmitters and receivers. And so people often use these for hiking, outdoor adventures, family communication, emergency communication. Event coordination is a big popular one that the ham radio community supports, as well as it can just be a social hobby that some people enjoy, being able to try to reach out and make contacts. One key concept here with the two-way radios is that only one person can talk at a time. So if two people are talking at the same time and you have a third person listening, you're not going to be able to hear both people. It would probably just be static. And so this is called half duplex communication. And so it requires practice when you have a big group in order to be able to not talk over each other. So there's several different radio services that you can have, and there's different equipment that's associated with each of these services. So most of you, if you have never had a lot of experience in radios, probably what you have seen is just FRS radios. There's the little blister pack walkie-talkies that you can get at a lot of box stores, although they are now carrying some GMRS radios as well. And so for the FRS radios, that's the family radio service, there's no license required. You can just buy the radios and start using them. The max power of them is about, depending on what channel, it's a half to 2 watts. So it's not very much power. And so you're also really limited in your range, as well as the ability to communicate through obstructions and foliage and so forth. There's no repeater access, and I'll get into repeaters later with the FRS radio service. And the cost to start with the FRS radios is $20 to $100. You can spend a lot more on really nice, rugged, waterproof FRS radios. And these radios are best for casual family use, especially when you have kids that may not practice good radio etiquette. Your radio signals are not going that far. You don't have that much power. It's okay to hand them out to a bunch of kids when you're camping and be able to use that. The next class up in radios is GMRS radios. I actually don't have an example of FRS radios here, but a lot of them look very similar to one of these smaller radios. This is actually a ham radio, but the ham radios and handheld ham radios and the GMRS radios look very similar as well in terms of both their size and their platform. You can actually get them in a whole range of different sizes, from compact to large to base stations or mobile units like we have here. So GMRS radios, there is a license that is required if you're going to comply with FCC rules. I know a lot of people that use GMRS radio services that do not actually have their GMRS radio license. Out here, it's generally so quiet, no one is complaining, but I think it's generally best practice to actually get your license. It costs $35 and it covers, it's good for 10 years and it covers everybody in your immediate family under one call sign. So your spouse, your parents, your kids, anybody else that's in your household is covered by one license. And so it's pretty low barrier. There's no exam that you need to take. The maximum power for GMRS radios is 5 watts on some channels, and then other channels you can go up to 50 watts. The limitation for the power of a radio is actually often limited by the device. So this is a GMRS radio, and it's limited to 5 watts on all the channels. This can't transmit up to 50 watts because that's a lot of power. It would make a lot of heat and it would drain the battery very fast. Your typical range for GMRS radios is 1 to 5 miles, but we're going to get into range because people always ask, how far can you talk? Well, it depends. And one thing that is an advantage about GMRS radios is that you can access repeaters. These aren't the statewide linked repeaters that are available for the ham radios, but there is the capability of using a repeater, and that is a radio that will relay your communications. The cost for entry for this GMRS radios is very similar, $25 to $200 to get into it, or you can spend even more. There's always, very expensive top of the line devices, but GMRS radios are great for outdoor groups, local emergency communications. We actually use GMRS radios for our community-based radio network that I'll be explaining later in this presentation. And so it's a great low barrier to be able to get into radios that have higher power. And there's other advantages to GMRS radios as well that I'll get into on the next slide. I'm not going to go too deep into the ham radio side of things, but there is an exam that is required, and there's multiple different levels of licensure for your ham radio or your amateur radio service. It costs $35 for 10 years again, but plus there's exam fees, but it does, again, require an exam. And your maximum power with ham radios is often limited to your device and what frequency you're on, but you can go up to 1,500 watts if you have the appropriate license and the equipment on certain frequencies. And your range could be global with ham radios. Actually, on some frequencies, you can actually bounce them off the ionosphere, and so you don't need to rely on repeater infrastructure to be able to communicate for hundreds, if not thousands of miles. There's lots of repeaters for the amateur radio space, and there's actually a whole network of linked repeaters throughout all of the state, and they're linked through self-sufficient microwave communication. It's part of the backbone of communication for the state police as well, so it's a priority infrastructure asset. So there's a lot more capability for being able to talk statewide. Even though your device can only talk so far, you can actually talk to the entire state I can talk to the entire state with this little device, but that's because I'm leveraging the repeater network. And ham radio is best for enthusiasts and regional and emergency communications, but also it can be for outdoors and groups as well. But it's just required that everybody in your group that you're communicating with also has their ham radio license. And so GMRS is a little bit more accessible for if you're just getting together a group of friends and going camping and hiking and so forth. I'm actually going to skip this slide because I think I've already covered all of this. But again, there's FRS, which is the family radio service, and that is no license required. They're small, lightweight, low power, great for kids. There's GMRS radio, which is the general mobile radio service. $35 for a 10-year license, covers your entire family. And it actually does share some channels with the FRS radio service. So there is some interoperability between GMRS and FRS. And then there's the ham radio service or amateur radio service that has multiple different tiers, lots of different frequencies, and lots of capability that comes along with that. So now we'll get in a little bit into the actual equipment, the radio options. I've actually compiled a list for our radio club of recommended equipment that I've actually tested and can recommend. So, you know, if you want specific details, you can ask me and I can give you access to that document afterwards. But one key thing about FRS radios, family radio service, is that the antenna is not removable. You can't take it off. And it's pre-programmed. It's simple. And some of them have the NOAA weather service channels already programmed in, so you can use it as a listening device for those the NOAA weather stations. But you can't really use it as a scanner for other frequencies. It's not programmable. You couldn't listen to the town road crew, for example. And many people already have these FRS radios in their house. But the key of having a removable antenna, that is one big benefit when you're stepping up to GMRS radios, because there's a lot of aspects that can improve your communication capability. The largest one is height, where we're going to get into all those details later, height and obstructions. But another big one is your antenna. And so often the antennas that come with some of these radios is very lackluster, not very not very impressive in terms of their capabilities. And so that allows you to get an aftermarket antenna that's larger, or if you're putting this in a pack and you don't want this hitting you in the face and you're just communicating short range over just a half a mile through the woods, like the one that Jane has there, then you can actually have a smaller antenna. Or you can actually get into a lot of other antenna options, magnetic mount antenna. We'll get into that. I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. But that's one of the big advantages of GMRS radios. Not every GMRS radio has a removable antenna. Some of them have a fixed antenna for waterproof IP rating. But it's that's kind of where they separate two different classes of GMRS radios. There's option one that often doesn't have a removable antenna. They're not programmable. They have the fixed channels in them, and you're more likely to find those ones in the store. And then there are GMRS radios that are programmable, and you can program them with a computer. And that's something that I offer as a support service to people in our radio club or anybody in the community. We can program in the amateur radio repeaters. You might not be able to communicate on them, but you can listen to the traffic that's going on in the statewide emergency communications. You can listen to the fire department. You can listen to the road crew. So there's a lot of additional capabilities you can have and program your radio how you want it with what channels you want to listen to. You can also listen to the NOAA weather channels and so forth. It's the General Mobile Radio Service. And so again, you need a license for that to comply with FCC rules. But one thing to note about the rules is if there is an emergency in which there is a threat to life or property, the rules can go out the window. As long as you don't have another more reasonable way of communicating. If you have cell service and you have the internet, you can't call in through the state repeater network without a call sign and without a license. Just because there's an emergency going on, use your cell phone, call 911. But if you don't have cell service and you're not near internet, and there's an amateur radio there, you can call in and leverage the statewide repeater network to be able to escalate and get support and say, hey, someone call 911. Here's the situation here. I don't have cell service. And there's almost always someone monitoring this the state repeater network. Then the next step up is ham or unlocked radios. And almost all of my radios that I have are actually ham unlocked radios. So there are some radios that are ham radios or amateur radios that can only communicate on the amateur radio frequencies. And so they can't communicate on GMRS. They're programmed that way, and so they're not interoperable. You can also get radios that are called unlocked, and that means they can communicate on any frequency. You can communicate on the fire department frequency. You can communicate with the amateur frequency on FRS, GMRS. You can communicate on any of those frequencies as far as the actual equipment capability goes. You don't want to communicate on the Capital West Fire Dispatch frequency, you're going to get in trouble. So it's important, if you get an unlocked radio, for example, that you know what you're doing, how to program the radio. You can program your radio such that even though this is an unlocked radio, and I have the Capital West Fire Dispatch programmed in here, I have it programmed such that if I press the PTT button when I by accident, when I'm on that channel, my radio won't communicate. So you can program it to set it up so that way you're not going to be interfering with any emergency services communications or anything like that. But it's an extra level of burden that you need to know what you're doing when you get an unlocked radio.
So Jay, sorry, when you say locked, do you mean it's just limiting some frequencies that you can access?
Yeah, so the question for those online is that when I say unlocked, what I mean is that the radio is just pre-programmed either in software, sometimes it's actually hardware, that it's and there's actually a circuit that only allows communication on certain frequencies. Some of them are software unlockable, some of them you can just buy them unlocked, but unlocking means you can communicate on any frequency that the device has capability of physically communicating on, and that includes frequencies that you should not communicate on. They're not GMRS, they're not amateur radio, they're emergency services frequencies. You should not be communicating on those. I have them programmed in my radios. I have some radios that I know the process of actually enabling that channel to be able to communicate. So that way, if through our radio network, if we get a message that and there's no cell service, no internet, and we need the fire department to be notified that we have an emergency, I can open it up and then be able to talk directly on Capital West Fire Dispatch. That would be in the event of emergency when there's no other option to be able to do that. And so by default, my radios do not communicate on those frequencies. But thanks for the question. So there's a lot on this slide, but really the idea that I want to communicate here is that radio waves are the same thing as light. Visible light is just a different frequency of the electromagnetic spectrum. So that goes all the way down to from high frequency up to gamma rays. It's all just electromagnetic radiation at different frequencies, and we can just happen to see a particular bandwidth of that electromagnetic spectrum when it bounces off of stuff, and that's visible light. And so visible light is shown up here in the red, and the similar physics apply to these radio signals that you send out. There's a little bit different because there's different wavelengths that interacts with objects a little bit differently, but I think it's an important concept because if you can see the person that you're talking to, or you have a good line of sight visually, then you can probably communicate with them. If there's a bunch of obstructions in the way, then you might not be able to communicate with them. So it's important to just keep that concept in mind in terms of if you're trying to communicate in a direction and you're on the other, I'm trying to communicate to someone over there and I'm on that side of my house, right up against the wall, maybe it's not the best spot for me to be standing. I should go where I can actually see and have some open visibility in that direction that I want to communicate. And so your eyes are a great feedback for, can I communicate to that location or with that person, because the obstructions are one of the biggest impacts on your ability to communicate. And so this also here shows that here in the UHF spectrum here, that's where FRS and GMRS is, as well as some ham frequencies are in that UHF space. And then there's, you can also, with your amateur license, you can communicate on some VHF frequencies. That's what the FM radio that you're listening to is. That's on the similar band as VHF. And then there's also HF, which is a ham radio frequency space, and that is a lot lower frequency. Lower frequency means longer wavelength, and so with HF, you can actually, that's where you can skip signals off of the ionosphere and get really long distance communication, or send a signal straight up and bounce it off the ionosphere to the surrounding area to be able to have a range of about 100 miles or so around you by bouncing that signal off the ionosphere without a repeater. And so that is, that's where I will leave that. If you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand. I'm going to be getting into antennas, equipment, and signal quality and best practices coming up next. So the basic operation when you're operating a radio is often to first power it on and set the volume. So you rotate the knob on the top often to power it on, and that is often also the volume knob. And then you select a channel and specify what channel you want to listen to. And then first you want to listen before you start talking. Just see, is there already people talking on that frequency? Are you hearing static because someone is transmitting? Maybe that frequency is in use. Maybe you want to choose a different frequency if you're going to be setting up some radios to communicate around your property with your friends. If there's already a conversation going on GMRS channel 2, maybe you should use channel 4. So always good to listen before you start transmitting. And then the PTT button is the push to talk button. And so you hold the PTT button, and it's good to hold it for at least a second before you start talking. A lot of people press it at the same time right when they start talking, and you miss the very first word that they said. And so it's good to have a little bit of a delay between when you push and then you start talking. It's also good to actually hold the radio a little bit away from your face, and it's good to be able to sometimes hear what it sounds like on another radio, whether you're talking too closely and you're saturating your microphone, or whether you're talking too quiet, or maybe you're not angling it towards your face enough and it's too quiet. Holding it up right in front of you is the best practice. And also, I get into this on a future slide, but also holding the radio, or really is what's important is the antenna being vertical is actually important. When you're done talking, sign off. One practice that is good when you're getting used to talking on the radio is saying over when you're done speaking and you're letting someone else take a turn. And so that way people know that, okay, you're done talking, and you say out when you're done with the conversation, or signing off, or 73, as some people say in the amateur space. And then to save your battery at the end when you're done talking, rotate that volume knob and turn it off. And often it will click, and that will help you save battery. Just some basic etiquette when you are operating a radio. Identify yourself at the beginning of your call. Say your name or your call sign, or both. Wait for a pause before you transmit. You don't want to transmit while someone else is talking. Otherwise, you're going to have nobody hear you. And again, press the PTT button before you start speaking, and speak slowly and clearly. If someone is not within really good radio range, there's going to be some static. It's important to speak slowly and clearly, so that way the other person can be able to hear you, even if there's some static in the background. You do want to try to keep the messages short and to the point, and not address multiple topics all in one session where you're then holding the PTT button. Give someone else the opportunity to respond. And if you want, you can say over when you're done speaking. And if you want to just acknowledge that you heard a message and you got the message, you can say copy or Roger to confirm that. There's a lot of things that are fairly obvious what not to do. Don't hold the PTT button and then think of what you want to say. Don't interrupt ongoing conversations, and don't use profane or offensive language. And don't share personal or sensitive information. That's one thing important to note about these radios. Anybody can listen. So even though we'll get into, if we have time, CTCSS or what they call privacy tones, where you can put in your radio, there's no conversation on this radio that is private. You can't legally, or according to the rules, you can't do encryption on your radios. And so if you're using any of these public radio spaces, GMRS or amateur space, you're not allowed to use encryption. So don't put sensitive information out there. I put where I am as part of our radio nets. I don't mind sharing where I am because it's important information to know, oh, I can hear him well when he's in this location. I don't care about that. I don't consider that to be private or sensitive at the time. So use your own discretion on what you're willing to share. Don't transmit music, sounds, or codes and hold the radio up against the speaker in your phone playing music. And don't say over and out. That's one thing that is a little pet peeve of some people. Over means you're done talking. Out means you're done with the conversation. You pick one or the other. A couple other radio phrases. I mentioned over and then out or clear is you're done with the conversation. Roger and copy. There's a debate on exactly which one means what. And so Roger generally means message received, got it. Copy means understood. Sometimes people use one of those and sometimes people use the other as I hear you and I'm going to take action on that thing. I'm going to go and move to that location. That's often used more in the military, but they are really synonymous when it comes to community radio use. If you say I'm monitoring or I'm standing by, that means that you're not I'm done with this. I'm not talking right now, but have my radio on and I'm listening. So maybe I finish up a conversation and the other person says I'm out and I'm going to leave my radio on in case someone else hops on. I'll say, this is KC1UJA, I'm standing by. And I'll just wait, see if someone else starts a conversation. And if you are needing to interject into a conversation and you have a priority message, you can say, ask for a break and use your call sign and to be able to request a pause for an urgent message. So how do we improve our transmission quality and have people hear us? So all these handheld devices, I'm not talking about working through a repeater right now. I'm talking about simplex communication, which is one radio directly to the other. They're near line of sight devices because, like I said, radio frequencies work with this similar physics as visible light. And so the biggest factor is your height. Not how tall you are. I don't judge. I love my shorty. Height is might. Get on top of a hill, go up and not have trees around you, or put an antenna up high. That is going to be one of the biggest improvements to your transmission quality. But also, it depends on obstructions, what antenna you're using, how much power you're using with your radio, as well as any electrical interference. Some other factors that I don't have covered in future slides is some factors that can hurt your signal quality. If your battery's low, your radio will maybe not be able to communicate with as much power. Don't hold the antenna or have the antenna sort of enclosed in your coat or something like that. It's good to have it out in the open, but especially touching the antenna, your body will actually absorb some of that electromagnetic energy, and it will prevent the successful transmission of your signals. Heavy rain, snow, dense or heavy rain or snow or dense fog will also really hurt your radio communication, because you think about, can you see well in the whiteout? No. Just like you can't see well, that rain, that snow, that fog is gobbling up the RF energy as well. And so I think I already mentioned to hold the radio vertically away from your body, but that is important because the radio waves that come off of here are actually polarized. And so generally it's good for everybody to hold their radio antenna vertically, because if you hold it sideways, then the polarization of your electromagnetic waves is at 90 degrees, and it's not going to be as strongly received unless the other person is holding the radio sideways. But all of the fixed antennas, base stations, magnetic mount antennas, they're all going to be vertical. So let's just go with this common standard, hold our antennas vertical. Besides your location and obstructions, your antennas are the #1 way that you can improve your signal. And often when you buy a radio, a lot of these radios are inexpensive, they perform well, but the antenna that comes with them is not great. And so there's 4 different classes of antennas or categories of antennas that I'll briefly talk about. One of them is the HT, or the handy-talkie, the rubber duck or a whip antenna. So that's just either this is a rubber duck here. People call it a rubber duck. I'll show it offline for those that are watching. This is a rubber duck here. It's just a short antenna. This is the one that came with this radio. You can also get what they refer to as a whip. Some radios will come with one. And so they call it a whip because it's often flexible and you can whip someone with it. Don't do that. If you break the wire inside the antenna, your antenna will not communicate very well. But these are the worst antennas that you can put on your radio, but there's still a broad range of spectrum of quality of antennas, both in terms of their transmission capability, but also another thing to consider is the robustness. This antenna is relatively inexpensive. It's very flexible. If you drop it, and it could actually break that wire inside there. This is not that robust of an antenna. This one is one of my favorite types of antennas. It's a signal stick. It is just a solid piece of metal. So I can bend this in a loop and loop it around on itself. And you have to be careful when you spring it free, but this is not going to break. These actually have a lifetime warranty. So there's other things to consider as well as just the capability of the transmission is like, are you going to be using this out in the field and banging it around when I'm using my chainsaw and so forth? I don't want an antenna that can break. Also, I guess what kind of falls into that category of what goes directly on your HT is a telescoping antenna. These are very nice for getting a really good reception and transmission capability. They're very inconvenient for carrying around with you, because even when they're collapsed, it's this stiff antenna that if you're having this on your hip or something, it's not very conducive to being mobile. But this is one that I just keep on my desk, and I often keep it just fully extended so that way I can listen easily on my, at my desk when I'm at my computer. But that's another capability of being able to have it be more packable, but also being able to extend it for better communication. The next one that I'll cover is a magnetic mount antenna. So I have a big one on my Suburban, but this is an example of a magnetic mount antenna where, or an antenna that is affixed to your vehicle if you're going to be using it regularly. So it has a magnet and an antenna and a coaxial, this is called a coaxial cable that transmits the energy down to your radio, and then you can plug it into your radio in your vehicle. This is particularly beneficial because of 2 different things. One is It allows you to be able to go outside of your house, even in inclement weather. You can, if this is on your car, you can go get in your car in a protected environment where you're not exposed to the elements. You can even have your car running and the heater on or the AC on, and you're more comfortable, as well as you can be able to drive up to a spot that maybe has better signal range. You can drive up to the top of the hill and be able to communicate out further. Additionally, generally, these antennas are better than, often they're longer than what you have on a HT, although you can see that this antenna is basically the same length as what I have directly on this radio. One thing to note about the magnetic mount antennas as well, though, it actually uses capacitive coupling to the metal of your vehicle, and it actually has a big ground plane. And so that actually effectively makes your antenna a lot better at sending out signals because you have a big ground plane underneath your antenna to be able to help radiate the signal effectively. And so even though this antenna, if I could detach this and put it directly onto my radio, this antenna as a magnetic mount would be a lot better because of the coupling of the metal sheet that's underneath it, using it as a ground plane. Or you can also just go stick this on your grill or anything that's metal. Generally you want a piece of metal that is at least the size of the waveform that you're communicating on, but stick it on any piece of metal out in your yard, some scrap steel, and then you can use that to improve your signal capability.
Okay.
Absolutely. That's especially important for base station permanent installed antennas, but it's also something to factor in when you have an antenna that's mounted on top of your car. It's probably going to be the highest point. So it's good to not be using that during an electrical storm. And yeah, thank you for that question. Handheld, using it I would use it in a protected environment where there's something metal that's bigger than you. A metal roof is, it will protect you from the lightning because the lightning will go through the metal roof. But actually, I have a slide on metal roofs and what's the best practice for when you're communicating inside and outside. Metal roofs gobble up, and anything metal, if you're trying to transmit through it, is very bad for trying to be able to transmit electromagnetic frequency. And that also includes power lines. Power lines will really attenuate your signal because it'll absorb a lot of that frequency. The next class of antenna is a roll-up J-pole, or some people call them a Slim Jim antenna. So it packs down to this size. But when you unroll it, I have it just one that's attached to a piece of PVC here. And so this can be deployed. You can tie a rope onto this and hoist this up into a tree. And so this is a really good option for a field deployable antenna for emergency communications, or to have in your go bag if you're a bit of a prepper and you want to have a go bag where you might need to be on the road and mobile, and you want to be able to have a good antenna with you. This can pack down really small. It doesn't take up a lot of space, but it has excellent performance. The problem with this is that you need something to hang it from in order to get it up. And you generally want to be holding it relatively flat. And so it's nice to have something like a frame that you can attach it to, like this little piece of PVC that I have here. But it is, they perform really, really well. And you can get any of these antennas, by the way, as one important note is, antennas are often tuned to be optimized at a very particular frequency, or sometimes two different frequencies. And so some antennas that you get will be called dual band, and that's generally for UHF and VHF amateur frequencies. Or you can get antennas that are tuned specifically for GMRS frequencies. And there are some antennas that are like the one that I have on my Suburban. I love that antenna. as much as one can love an antenna, it's actually a search and rescue antenna that has a really wide spectrum to it, where it actually has good performance at GMRS and amateur frequencies. And so there's always a trade-off of the performance at one frequency versus the performance at another frequency. And so it's important to keep that in mind when you're looking at antennas. Again, I have a document with a whole list of different equipment recommendations that I can share with anybody that's interested. The last antenna, I didn't bring one with me, but it's a base station antenna. We have one installed up in the steeple of the town hall here. We're going to be installing one on the Maple Corner store, and we have a couple other that we're going to be installing at other locations around town for adding emergency communication infrastructure. This is the best type of antenna. They're generally made out of fiberglass with a wire up inside, a metal rod that is tuned for a particular frequency. They are, robust to the elements, and they do require, if you're going to install one permanently, it does require proper grounding for lightning protection and so forth. So that's the biggest barrier and the most complicated to install, but it also will give you the most performance, generally the most expensive as well. So now a little bit on obstructions. So you're standing here with your radio. One important thing is to keep a few feet around you free of obstructions. You don't want to be standing right next to your vehicle, right next to a tree or anything like that. It's important, especially that first few feet around you, to maintain free of obstructions. If you're communicating inside, it's going to limit your range, but there's some places in your house that are better than others. If you're trying to communicate through a metal roof, that's bad. The metal roof is going to gobble up all that RF energy, and you're not going to be able to communicate out very well. If you're in a window, you can say, oh, I can see through the window, but if it has a metal screen in it, that metal is also going to really gobble up the screen. Fiberglass screens are okay. Metal screens are no good for being able to communicate through, they're not good. But if you just have a glass window, glass is actually pretty permeable to both visible light, but also RF frequencies. And so glass windows is actually the preferred spot, unless you have a permanent external antenna that's installed at your house that you can use. Then that's excellent. That's, of course, the best way to go. When you're outside, which is preferred, outside to outside communication, because then you're not trying to communicate through the wood and the nails and wiring of your house. There's no trees, no obstruction. That's great. If there's dormant trees, that's okay. It'll attenuate your signal a little bit. If there's trees with a lot of foliage, those leaves have moisture in them, and that moisture, eats up some of that RF energy. So you're going to get some losses when you're communicating through trees. When you're trying to communicate through structures, metal or power lines, you're going to get a lot, your performance will be a lot worse. And then trying to communicate through terrain is just not going to happen. And so terrain is one of the biggest blockers for RF, especially in this town. As you know, we have lots of undulating terrain. It's very difficult. So speaking of that, this is actually a profile view from my house up to that's Marshfield Road and East Hill Road. And so I'm over here at A, and someone over on the intersection of Marshfield Road and East Hill Road is at point C. So I would be able to talk to person B. I would be able to talk to person C, but I wouldn't be able to talk to person D or person E because there's terrain in the way. And so this is assuming everybody's like on a straight line here. So when you're down in a valley, it really limits your ability to communicate. So person B, for example, can talk to person C, but they can communicate to person D. And so that's why it's really important for our radio network to be able to have enough distributed radio operators, especially until we have a permanent installation of a repeater, that we actually have to relay these messages. And so we have to, someone may not be able to hear everybody, but as long as each person can be heard by another operator, then the message can be relayed. But that takes practice to be able to do that without talking over each other. And then there's poor person E over here. They can barely communicate with person C, and they can't communicate to person B. They only have one line of communication that's not very good. So maybe at top of their house, they put up an antenna, and then they have marginal communication with person B, and they have good communication with person C. And so that's how getting up higher and also having a better antenna will also help as well. But that is where you can really get a lot of gains, is going up higher, holding your radio up a little bit when you're trying to receive, and also making sure that if you know that the person you're trying to communicate with is in that direction, don't stand and have the radio frequencies try to go through your body to get to them. Turn and face that direction, because then at least you don't have the obstruction of your body. And so obstruction management is one of the biggest keys for having effective communication. Nick has a question. Nick, I'm not sure if we'll be able to hear you in the room. You can try to unmute and talk.
Okay.
Nick, sorry. I think that when this meeting was created, it didn't allow external people to communicate. So if you would please type your question in the chat, I will address it when you send it.
I'll do that.
Thanks.
Okay.
So now I'd like to introduce our Circle Up network that we're establishing here in our town, but also my goal is to establish it as a framework that other rural communities can use to be able to establish a community-based radio communication network for being able to relay needs of the citizens to throughout the network and escalate it as necessary to be able to get people the support that they need when there's an event, where there's an emergency, when maybe there's no power, no cell service. How are we going to be able to get those people what they need? And that's going to be through our self-sufficient radio communications. So the Circle Up stands for Community Informal Radio Club for Local Emergencies, Unity, and Preparedness. So we're trying to build up this network around town. We're trying to recruit and qualify radio operators. We have a process for actually becoming a qualified operator. You need to demonstrate knowledge of your equipment and also capability that you can communicate reliably with at least one other operator in our network. Because otherwise, if you're off on an island and you can't communicate with anybody else that's in the group, then we won't be able to hear you, and you can't be an effective operator. So our group is activated as when we have power outages or any emergency events. We use accessible GMRS radios for our internal communication around town as part of the Circle Up network. We do have some people like Jane, myself, Betty, who are super operators that have amateur radio license. And so if necessary, we can escalate out to the statewide repeater network or be able to leverage those repeaters to be able to maybe get mutual aid from other local communities and so forth. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to establish and practice these protocols for when and how to communicate during an emergency or during a power outage. For just as a quick example, we have the 333 rule that we use. And so that is if we have power outages that's lasting longer than 3 hours, or there's a declared emergency and we activate our emergency operations center, which would be here in this building, then that is when the 333 rule would go into place. And so that's every 3 hours, you turn your radio on, we use GMRS channel 3, and you want to listen for at least 3 minutes. And generally it's a good idea to just check in and say, hey, this is me checking in. I don't have any news, but just so people know that people are out there listening. The reason why we keep it to 3 minutes is because not everybody has backup power. And so to conserve battery consumption, we have these common times that we will turn the radios on to be able to listen. Is there any traffic? Is there any urgent messages that we're listening for that need to get relayed or communicated? Is there someone that maybe it's something we can help the community member out internally? Someone's just out of gas in their generator and they have a medical device they need to power. Maybe it's something that we actually need to try to get a hold of the fire department because there's a medical emergency and no one has cell service and no one has internet. So it's the goal is to have a robust, resilient network that is self-sufficient and self-contained for that. Yeah, so if you're interested in joining our Circle Up mailing list, you can contact me, jakeaho@gmail.com. We also have a Google group. That's how we right now we're using that for our communications. We will have a web page coming up soon, but right now we don't have a dedicated web page. But we have a Google Drive that we are storing different documents, references, information about the local repeaters, etc., radio programming files, and so forth. And so here's what the Circle Up framework looks like. I kind of already went through that, but we have our community is largely based in different regions. There's Adamant, there's North Calais, there's East Calais, there's Maple Corner. Of course, there's people distributed in between, but often these communities are a local in a local valley that it's hard to communicate out of there with a radio. But the goal is for each region to have dedicated radio operators. And our goal is our next steps are to actually compile that list and communicate that out to the people of the community. So they know if there's an emergency when there's no power, no internet, they know whose door to go knock on because they can relay a message out through the radio network. And so we can relay messages among our operators. And our future goal is to have a GMRS repeater here in town. And our super operators can actually leverage our local, statewide, and or regional amateur repeater networks to escalate to Vermont Emergency Management, local other town operators in other towns, to maybe make a request for mutual aid if there's no other way of communicating. Or also just information sharing, having situational awareness of, are other towns hit as badly as us? Is there other needs other places? Or what roads are washed out? Stuff like that. So actually on this map it might be a little hard to see. I can share the link to the online map version of this. And this is the NFMRA repeater network. All of these repeaters shown here in yellow are actually the linked repeater system that they're independently linked, not through the internet. They're linked through direct beaming of microwaves, and all of those stations have enough gas generator backup to last at least a couple of weeks. And it is a priority asset of the state to keep them fueled. And so it is a really important strategic asset that the super operators with our amateur radio license actually have access to. But anybody that has a GMRS radio or a scanner can listen to the traffic that's happening on those frequencies. From the town hall here, even though we're in a valley, we actually have a really good line of sight down to the Williamstown Graniteville repeater. It's up behind the quarry. And so I would expect that most people in town would be able to listen to that repeater.
Is there some protocol or process for accessing repeaters, or is it just kind of transfer?
So the way that works with the repeater is you have to have it programmed into your radio. Often there's a transmit frequency and also a different receive frequency. And sometimes there's some additional subaudible tone that gets sent out when you communicate. I have a slide on subaudible tones, and I don't think I'm going to be able to have time to get to that this presentation, but you have to have it programmed into your radio. And besides that, then it's just pushing the PTT button and having a good enough signal to be able to reach the repeater where it will receive your signal, and then it will rebroadcast it throughout the entire state of Vermont.
So you have to know about that repeater for that.
There's resources for being able to program your repeaters. It's listed online in repeaterbook.com. I have a profile in my radios, and I support people creating, I call them profiles, but it's programming for your radio that has the programming of all the different channels. And even though this is a GMRS radio, I have those amateur radio or amateur repeaters programmed in here, so that way you can listen to that even on this device. Yeah.
I set it to the transmit frequency of that repeater, but when I push the top button, if I look on the front here, the numbers change, and I'm transmitting on a frequency that only the repeater receives, and it simultaneously transmits it on the other frequency. So it's an internal thing, and it's quite an amazing thing that those two don't interfere with each other. So you have to program what's called a split, which is the difference between the frequency you use to connect to the repeater and the frequency that goes out that everybody else listens to.
I got a slide on that.
You got a slide on it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, good.
So we're jumping ahead one slide, but I think that's okay. Actually, let me just step back one step. Just the last plug for Circle Up. Encourage everybody to join the club. There's no requirement. You can just get on our mailing list. We do have weekly practice nets where we're actually practicing relaying messages. We're using that for data collection of what areas can communicate to what other areas. Often I'm driving around to different spots, testing out, can we communicate to this location? How about this location? Who can all talk to that particular spot? So we're doing a lot of data collection. We're testing our equipment. You have access to me as tech support, but also it's about being prepared and helping your community in the event of an emergency, and also allowing you to use your radio as a scanner to stay informed. This is not an up-to-date map, but this is the kind of thing that I'm working on mapping out, is what our lines of communication are around town, where we have good and where we have moderate and mediocre lines of communication, to be able to build out that spider web of who can communicate with who. Getting to exactly what Jane was explaining here. One thing about using a repeater is, if we were to use a repeater in town here for our internal communications, or even the repeater, the amateur repeaters, the radios do not talk directly to each other. I can have these two radios turned on. They're both programmed on the same channel for the Williamstown repeater. If I didn't have access to the Williamstown repeater and am just looking at these two radios in isolation, I talk to I talk on this radio will not hear it. So the reason why is, here we have a little diagram of that. Radio A, these radios are all talking to a program to talk to the repeater. So they're transmitting on frequency A, and that's the input to the repeater. And they're listening on a different frequency. Every radio is listening to it on a different frequency. And so I'm transmitting on frequency A and I'm listening on frequency B. And so when I'm talking, when radio A is talking to the repeater, let me get the laser pointer going. There we go. If I have radio A, I'm talking on frequency A. The repeater is then simultaneously, as it's receiving frequency A, it is transmitting that as on frequency B, and that's the output of the repeater, and that's what all the radios are programmed to listen to. And so all the communication actually funnels through the repeater. And that's why, if you're leveraging a repeater for an internal communication with our emergency communications, you really need to choose the one best spot that everybody can communicate to, because you're no longer talking radio to radio like what we're doing right now. You're funneling all the communication through the repeater. So you're talking on channel A or frequency A, and it is then transmitting on frequency B, and that's what your radios are listening to. And so your radio has the capability of communicating on one frequency and then listening on a different frequency. And that's the basics of how a repeater works. It's just the standard repeater operation is that the repeater is broadcast or transmitting out at the same time that it's receiving. So as it's hearing you on frequency A on the input, it's sending out on frequency B, which is the output. And so, but yeah, the radios aren't directly talking to each other. And so that's a limitation.
Jake, I've been involved with the parrot repeater, but is that a separate thing?
That is a different thing. And so what Fletcher is referring to is I have a little device that I can plug into a radio, and I've been sticking it at different locations actually with this roll-up J-pole antenna. And I've been deploying at different places. And what the parrot repeater is it does not use two different frequencies. It just listens, and the little box that's attached to the radio records whatever the radio hears, and then it retransmits it back out. And so it is talking just like you're talking radio to radio. And so everybody can hear you talk, and then they'll hear the repeat from the parrot repeater. One advantage of deploying that device, that's not something that is really a permanent installation for a repeater. That's more for testing and diagnosing your capability to communicate with different areas. And so just in case when I drive up to a particular location, if not everybody that's part of our Circle Up network are able to get on the radio at the same time, we lose out on the ability to gather data of who can communicate to this spot out here. I was out here, but only a couple of people were available at that time. But instead, what I can do is I can deploy that parrot repeater attached to a radio. So that way, sometime in the next week until the battery dies, people can communicate to the repeater, and they can hear the message sent back to them, and they can see how good was that transmission. So it's a useful tool for being able to kind of build our coverage map, as well as a simple way of being able to deploy a temporary repeater that could be used in the event of an emergency. Sarah just made that. Yeah. There's two other topics, two other slides that I want to get into that are a little bit technical, but I think they're important concepts of some of the key radio settings that you need to know in order to make sure that you can hear people. And one of them is squelch. So a lot of older radios had a variable knob called squelch, and what you would do is you'd turn the squelch down until you hear static, and then you turn it up a little bit. And so what that squelch is but now on these digital radios, it's just a number. So I set the squelch to 1, 0, 1, 2, all the way up to 10. So what that squelch represents is what is the signal strength that a signal that we're receiving has to have before it comes out to the speaker. Because you're still receiving radio frequencies. Your body's receiving radio frequencies right now, but what is the required signal strength before it then comes out of the speaker? And so if you have a squelch setting of 0, you may hear a lot of static. If there's someone on that frequency a long ways away, you may be hearing errant transmissions and static coming through. So you may want to bump your squelch up a little bit, so that way you're not hearing that faraway conversation, you're only hearing your party. In general, in this area, we're a very radio quiet area, which is great for having good communication without interference. So generally, I advise people that are part of our radio network to keep their squelch low at 1 or 2, which is a low squelch, which means sometimes you're going to be hearing a lot of static. But that's important, because if you're hearing static, that means someone else is talking. Don't start talking because someone else is talking. If your squelch is way up and there's a staticky message, you won't hear it. You may not even know that someone's talking. You can go to talk and transmit, and you're talking over someone. And so that's why it's particularly important when you have a widespread distributed network where you're trying to relay messages, that you actually have that squelch, that threshold of the signal strength set down low, so that way you can hear even the staticky transmissions. So here I have an example. Radio A has a squelch of 2. Radio B has a squelch setting of 8, which is high. It's a high threshold, and so that only the clearest of signals will get through to Radio B. Radio C is there transmitting. It's nice clean signal. It'll get through to both of them. We have Radio D here. It's transmitting through some terrain, some objects, and some obstructions. It's a mediocre, moderate signal, and radio A and B are in the same location, by the way. Radio A will hear. Doesn't mean that they're hearing necessarily no static, but it will come through the speaker. You'll hear that someone is transmitting. Radio B may not even know that someone is transmitting because their squelch is so high, because it might be coming in, might be coming out, but unclear if radio B will actually even hear them. It's not that you can hear them clearly. It's like it won't even come out the speaker. And if you have radio E with a poor signal, then radio A may hear it with a squelch setting of 2. You might want to lower it if you want to hear if someone far away is transmitting. But radio B definitely won't hear radio E if that radio B's squelch is set up too high. So that is what the squelch setting is on almost all of these radios now. It's not an analog option. It's just a digital 0 through 10. Then the last topic that I'm going to cover here, it's a bit technical, is these CTSS tones. Also, there's DCS tones. That's continuous tone coded squelch system. I think it's system. And so a lot of radios call it a privacy tone. But like I said, there's no privacy when you're talking on these radios. What it is it's a filter. So, and also it's the sub-audible tone. So if we have radio A, it's on GMRS 3, which is a particular frequency. It is set up where it has a transmit tone as well as a receive tone of 74.4 hertz. You won't hear that through the radio transmission, but it's also when I press the button and I talk, it's sending out my frequency modulated voice, but it's also sending out this sub-audible tone of 74.4 hertz. And so because this radio A, has a receive tone, it is only going to hear out the speaker another transmission that has that sub-audible tone of 74.4 hertz. So if we have radio B over here, which is on GMRS 3, and it doesn't have a receive tone, so they don't have a filter set up for what they're receiving, but they're sending out the sub-audible tone. So that they're transmitting the tone of 74.4 hertz. Radio A can talk to radio B, and radio B can talk to radio A, because the tone you can think of it as unlocking that firewall to get to my speaker. Because radio B is communicating out that 74.4 hertz as part of the transmission. And when my radio A, hears that 74.4 hertz transmission, it says, oh, okay, I'll pass that through to the speaker. If there's another radio C, which is just on GMRS 3. So these radios are all on the same frequency. They're all on GMRS 3. But it doesn't have any tones. No, it's not transmitting any tones. It doesn't have the filter or the receive tone that's required. Radio C can talk to radio B because radio B doesn't have that filter. And radio B can talk to radio C just fine because it doesn't matter that radio B is sending out that additional tone. Radio C you don't hear it audibly. But radio C will not be able to talk to radio A because radio A has a receive tone. And so it's filtering out any messages or any transmissions, and it's not coming out to the speaker unless that transmission has that sub-audible tone. Yeah, Bill.
How does radio A not walk over radio C because it can't hear?
It happens.
That's a great question. The question for those online is, how does radio A not walk all over radio C? Because radio A can't hear them. Just like if your squelch is set too high, you might be talking over them. And sometimes if your whole group is using these, the transmit tone and the receive tone, there might be another group that is using that same frequency and they hear you, but you don't hear them. And so you're talking over them, but also it might interfere with your ability to communicate with each other. Even though you don't hear the other person, the other radios are also on GMRS3 transmitting at that frequency. And if your radio is receiving two different signals on that same frequency, it's hard for it to decipher which one is which. And so it can add for degraded signal between the two radios, which may otherwise have good signal, because there's someone else communicating at the same time saying, hey guys, I'm on this frequency, get off of it. Yeah, and that happens in the city. Where you'll also really see that happen frequently is on the ski resorts. Because if people just turn on their FRS walkie-talkies and they say, oh, we're going on channel 2, and they're talking on channel 2, you're going to hear a lot of different groups. If you want to only hear your group, you go choose, I'm going on channel 2, and we'll use CTCSS tone. Often in these pre-programmed radios, it will just be CTCSS tone 1, 2, 3, or 4, as they're just preset, because they are preset. 74.4 happens to be CTCSS tone number 3. And that's why we use it for our circle up network, because they try to keep everything with 3s just so it's nice and easy. But if one group has the CTCSS tone, filtering it out, they call it privacy tone. It's not private. It just means you're not hearing all the other noise. You're only hearing people that are sending that tone. So it's really a filter. And so that way you're not hearing other transmissions. You're only hearing people in your group. So again, radio A can hear radio B. Radio A cannot hear radio C. Radio B can hear both radio A and B, and radio C can hear radio A and B because there's no filters on radio B and radio C. And so it's an important decision to make in terms of whether you're using a CTCSS tone. I would say if you're using it in this area, we're so radio quiet, there's not a lot of traffic going on. Don't use a CTSS tone until you're sure that no one else, not one of your neighbors, is normally using that frequency. Because at my house, I have my radio on a lot, and I'm communicating when I'm out in the woods. I'm communicating back and forth to my wife. And so I generally don't use a CTCSS tone because I want to know if someone else starts using that frequency, I can hear them and I can say, oh, hey, by the way, this is our frequency we normally use. You're welcome to listen in and hear about my random thoughts as I'm chainsawing, but there's going to be more traffic. If you want it to be quiet, maybe go to a different channel.
Washington has the same frequency as one here in Vermont, but a different time.
Exactly. And so what Jane had mentioned, for those of you that are online, there is the amateur repeaters generally always use a tone. So they have a filter. So they have to hear a particular subaudible tone before it actually receives the message and sends that throughout the repeater network. So that way someone talking on that frequency without that tone may not intentionally be trying to trigger that repeater, but also it allows for multiple repeaters to actually use the same frequency. But if I have a tone of 110.1, that is the CTCSS, the PL tone for the Williamstown repeater. If I don't have that subaudible tone that I'm transmitting, I won't key into the repeater, it won't get rebroadcast throughout the state. And so it's a way of ensuring that only people who are intending to communicate through the repeater network are actually the ones that are communicating through it.
This behaves as a local repeater. The other tone, it goes statewide. Just in close, can use that repeater without going all over the state. If you use the other tone, you can go all over the state. It's pretty neat.
Great. Yeah, so are there any questions? Because that's the end of my formal presentation, and yeah, thanks. Yeah.
There's all these different frequencies that you're not supposed to use because they're emergencies, but where's the list and how do you know?
So if you get a GMRS radio and you can communicate, and you get a GMRS license, you can communicate on the GMRS frequencies. Generally, those channels, the GMRS channels, are going to be pre-programmed into any GMRS radio you get. And I can also then program, support programming additional frequencies that you can listen to. But that's the point of getting your amateur, when you get your amateur license, there's an exam. So you have to study what is in the rules, what are you allowed to do, what are you not allowed to do, what frequency domain are you allowed to communicate on, and which ones are you not. And so there's a band, it's called a band plan that we have for the state of Vermont, and the US has a general common band plan where there's certain even within the amateur frequency space that I have as a technician, I can communicate on any of those frequencies, but there's certain frequencies that are generally used for Morse code. There's certain frequencies that are generally used for remote control of other devices. There's certain frequencies that are used for certain digital modes and sending GPS data. And there's also a frequency that is the national calling frequency. So it's important that you actually know what frequencies you can and can't communicate on. But generally, the way that most people are going to operate their radio are they're going to program it, and we can support helping you program a radio. And then you're not going to just punch in some frequency, 146.520. You're going to actually go to what I have saved in here is on channel 86 is 146.520. And I know that that's a frequency I can communicate on if you have your amateur license. So generally, I have them saved as presets, these kind of common frequencies. And also when I program a radio, I can program it to don't let the radio communicate outwards on that channel. I only want to listen. On the fire department, on the Capital West Fire Dispatch, I only want to listen. I don't want to communicate out. If it's in an emergency and I need to, I know how to open up and allow myself to then communicate on that channel. But in general, I don't want to just be listening to Capital West Dispatch. I put my radio down and it pushes the PTT button, and now I'm interfering with the fire department's ability to hear Capital West Dispatch. And so you can program those safeguards into your radio. But in general, for GMRS radios, they will come pre-programmed. And FRS radios, they are pre-programmed. There's no, you can't program other frequencies in there. It is just channel 1, 2, 3, 4. And those are set frequencies and you can't change that. So that's part of why there's no license required for FRS radios, is because you can't accidentally transmit on any emergency services channels.
So, radio, just messing around with it. It's probably safe, but I'm not going to accidentally contact the fire department.
Yes, that's correct. If you buy a GMRS radio, almost all of them will come pre-programmed with just the basic GMRS channels and the GMRS repeater channels and already programmed in there. But then that's, takes up 20 something memory spots of your, some of these radios, like this one has 999 you could put in here. So you won't have any other channels programmed in here, but if you buy a GMRS radio, it will be pre-programmed with those channels. But I have radio programming software that is compatible with most radios, especially the more inexpensive ones. And so feel free to reach out. I'm happy to help you program your radio and also give you a list of all the different local repeaters, the National Weather Service frequencies. There's other frequencies that might be good to listen to that you don't want to communicate on, but like the National Search and Rescue frequency, in case they're doing a missing person and they're looking, you could listen in on that. And so I'm happy to help people program their radio and get you up and on the air.
These basic $35 for 2 or something
On Amazon.
5G Plus. It has an A and B, and so you can, A could be on your channel 3 GMRS, and B can be set to the repeater. We just have repeaters to listen to, where you can scan scan through all of the channels.
You can listen on 2 channels at the same time, and you push the A/B button to which one you're going to transmit on.
Yeah, so that's a good point, and thanks for bringing that up. A lot of these radios, what Betty was mentioning, and also Jane was elaborating on for those of you online, is that a lot of these radios have 2 different channels that they can monitor. That's called dual watch. You can turn it on or off, so you're only actually listening to one or the other. Or you can have it on where you're actually listening to both, but there's only one that's active, so that way when you push the PTT button, that's the one you're communicating out on. But you could monitor some of the amateur repeaters or even the town road crew and find out, just listen to what's going on if you want. But yeah, there's always an indicator of which one is your main one, the one that you'll be communicating out on. But if you're not comfortable with your radio and you don't feel like you need the capability to, in the event of emergency, communicate out to the amateur radio space frequencies or to the fire department, I think that is something that should only be done by someone that's very experienced in the event of an emergency. I have that capability, but if you're not comfortable and you want to just make sure that you're just only communicating on GMRS radios, there's 2 options. You can either get a GMRS radio that is like this radio right here. I cannot unlock this. It's hard-coded in the radio firmware. I cannot communicate on the amateur radio frequencies, even though I have it programmed in here. Even if I set it in my programming software, allow it to communicate on that frequency, it won't communicate out to the amateur radio frequencies or the emergency services frequencies. So this is like hard-coded where it's not. For the other radios that are unlocked, you can also effectively make it into a GMRS radio with your programming. I can program into it, do not allow this radio to communicate on any other frequencies except for GMRS. And so that way, effectively, through the software and through the programming, I've made it similar to this radio where it will not communicate out on any of the other frequencies besides GMRS. But in the event of an emergency, or maybe, if you're someone that only has your GMRS license, you're thinking, maybe I'll get my amateur license. This radio would be able to communicate on GMRS, and later you could reprogram it to open up the amateur radio frequencies to then allow you to communicate on it. So it's a device an unlocked device is one that can grow with you, but it does come with additional responsibility. And also one thing I feel obligated to say is that an unlocked device like this is not FCC type certified for communication on GMRS. I do it all the time. No one will know the difference. There's no difference. I can push 3 buttons and turn this radio on and put it into GMRS mode, and then it is a type certified GMRS device. Or I can push some buttons and turn it back on, and then it's unlocked. So technically, the way I'm using this device on GMRS radio frequencies is not FCC type certified device as the way I'm using it, but it is actually the same physical device. No one will be able to tell the difference, but it's something that you have to consider in terms of what's your comfort level with, both adhering to the programming and knowing what you're doing with your radio, and will you potentially expand out into the amateur frequency space to be able to leverage the additional benefits of having your amateur radio license.
Can I have a little possibility? So you're getting started with the GMRS, but the class that I did 3 years ago, these 2 took the test, and now they're and you're about to take the next level test.
We'll see.
So
I'm gonna try.
there's a lot they call ham radio a hobby, and that's, in a way it is. It's fun. We talk about, you can still play radio. So there's a lot of playing with our radio toys, but it's also useful. I used to do, in far northern California, I did communications for a search and rescue group. I sat in fire lookouts for Cal Fire using their radios and the ham radios. And so there's a lot you can do with a ham radio.
Well, even like the bike, you know, the, what do they call it,
The muddy onion.
You know, there's ham radios, there would be station, ham radio operators.
Yeah,
who
that's fine.
communicate, because we don't have cell service, a lot of, you know, a lot of the locations where folks stop for.
And the ride the
if
ridges
there's
spike
any, you know,
thing.
injury or need
Yeah.
or something. Or run. or-
It's good practice too.
Great. Well, thanks, Jane. And yeah, with that, I will give a plug to encourage anybody that's interested to, yeah, definitely get your GMRS license. It costs $35, covers everybody in your household. I encourage everybody to do that. If you're looking for recommendations on devices, I'm happy to do that. And also, of course, encourage you to get your amateur radio license if you're so inclined. As Jane and Betty mentioned, there's a lot of events besides just emergency communications that the amateur radio hobbyists will participate in. A lot of the Vermont 100 and the Muddy Onion bike race. And there's a lot of these events that happen. Even the, you know, the Boston Marathon always does a call for radio operators. And so there's a lot of opportunities to then volunteer as a radio operator and to help support some of these events that go on, especially those that are in more remote areas where radio communication is a critical part of having a safe and effective event. So.
Just communicating as the participants went back and forth. Sit up there, felt like it was up in the tundra somewhere.
Have there been any town emergencies where these were handy, useful?
So we really have leveraged that after the flooding events, and so we've been practicing, and hopefully we don't ever need to use it. You know, it's great that, you know, this past year we really didn't have any extended power outages. We didn't have significant infrastructure issues or flooding, and so that was great. But we want to be prepared. We want to be prepared for that event when we do need that. Especially, you know, it would have been particularly helpful during the floods, because that's right when I joined the emergency management committee, and it was sometimes a little bit more difficult to be able to have an assessment of what happened, what the road conditions are in different places, and aggregate that information. And I think that the radio network could have been beneficial, just not even for communicating needs of an individual person that has an emergency, but just having eyes on the ground in these different areas of town that might be cut off and isolated because of washouts. We can find out what's the condition over there, and also find out, are there needs? Is there someone in your local area that then we need to be able to bring in some supplies on if they're cut off from the rest of town? And so I think that can be an important thing. Yes, Bill.
Agencies. I understood that emergency services is you're getting ready for something you hope doesn't happen. So that the training itself has to be fun. You have to have a good time doing what you do. And maybe it'll be useful.
So our Sunday night nets, we call NETS at nets, where we practice, just have our practice with the GMRS radios. And it's really a lot of fun, because sometimes, you know, one of us will be mobile, or I'll be at my house, or I'll go to the end of the driveway, or I'll try a different antenna, or go to a different window in my upstairs, and then can I hear so-and-so from, you know, what location. It's just really interesting to figure out what works even in your own yard.
Jane Morby up at the Maple Corner, she drives around like, I'm up on the hill, or when someone says, yes, yeah.
It's really just kind of fun. Like, but if we were to lose all power and cell service, I'd be able to talk to, you know, we'd be on to communicate. It'd be.
And people like it when somebody's out with a chainsaw, that you know that they can communicate in. That's even just and it's useful.
Yeah, and also I have a friend that lives alone, and he reaches out to me when he says, I'm gonna go cut down a bunch of trees. Can you turn your radio on? He has his radio with him. And so that way, it's just on GMRS, but that way there's someone listening, and he doesn't have good cell service at his place. And so that way, if there's something that happens, someone's listening. So he reaches out when he does that. We're gonna have one last question and then we'll end the presentation for tonight. Bill, you had a question?
I didn't have a question, but I remember when power went out several years ago, and it affected the phone split down the road in Pekin. So the phones actually went dead because it wasn't any power. And, you know, having a handheld radio would be something, because there is no cell service out here. At least there wasn't. There is now, but it didn't used to be.
Yeah, and also relying on the cell service, we had recently had cell outages that have impacted this whole area, and you're also relying on that infrastructure to be maintained, and you know the going through you know corporations' infrastructure is you're putting your communication ability in their hands as opposed to the radios are something that's self-sufficient. Keep your batteries charged up, especially if you have a battery bank, then you can be self-sufficient for being able to communicate with the rest of your community. So thank you all for coming out. I'm happy to stick around afterwards for any questions, and happy to have anybody sign up. Thank you. Thank you, everybody online.
Supporting materials.
Yeah. For what do you mean by supporting material?
Yeah, some of the stuff we talked about, like in the end, you know, the channels to use.
Yep. Yeah, and I have a list of you know recommended equipment, at least stuff that I have tested and I believe is good quality and value. And so it's a whole tier from small and expensive to, you know, more expensive, more robust. If you want something that's waterproof, this is a completely waterproof radio you can drive a truck over. And so I have a list of different equipment that is I would recommend that people take a look at and consider getting. And depending on whether you're interested in unlocked radio or GMRS radio. And yeah, I'm working on actually compiling all this information in terms of our emergency procedures right now to then publish it on the town website. So that way our communication plan is people know and people can be able to listen in to our circle up communications to be able to just stay informed of what's going on.
So what the location for the repeater? Does it have to have power?
Yes, it does have to have power. And so that's why we don't have a